All right, now let's take a look at another new panel inside Photoshop 2020. This time it's the Patterns panel, which allows you to create repeating patterns. And to get to it, as with all panels, you go up to the Window menu and choose the Patterns command from this long list of panels that begin with the letter P. At which point you'll see a bunch of folders, or groups if you will, of default tile patterns. And to get a sense for what they look like, you can just twirl one of them open, such as trees right here. And with any luck, you should be seeing large thumbnails. If not, you can choose this command from the panel's flyout menu. Now, these thumbnails give you a pretty good idea of what the tiles look like, but they don't show you how they repeat. And so if you want to get a better sense for how a pattern looks, then just go ahead and drag it and drop it into the background. And that will create a new dynamic pattern fill layer, as you can see right here. And this is one very nicely repeating pattern. Somebody spent some time on it, which is nice, and a big boost in a positive direction compared to the default patterns of the past, some of which repeated nicely, but all of which were very small. All right, now if you want to modify this pattern, you can double-click on its thumbnail in order to bring up the Pattern Fill dialog box, and then you could change the scale value, for example, if you like. You can switch to a different pattern by clicking on this thumbnail and then expanding one of these groups and clicking on a pattern. And by the way, you can click on this little settings icon in order to view large thumbnails, just as you see inside the Patterns panel. All right, so that's one way to work. I'll go ahead and click OK to accept that change. Another way to change a dynamic fill pattern to some other pattern available to you inside Photoshop is to click on its thumbnail, just to make sure that its corners are highlighted, and then go back up to the Patterns panel and click on a different pattern, such as this evergreen pattern right here. Notice that it's still scaled to 50%. So if you want to change the scale value, you've got to double click on that thumbnail and then modify the scale here inside the Pattern Fill dialog box. So I'll go ahead and reset it to 100%. All right, so fun stuff, and certainly an upgrade compared to patterns in the past. But what might interest you more is how you go about creating your own patterns. And so I'll go ahead and get rid of this current layer by pressing the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac. Notice that my background is now selected, and so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this guy right here. And armed with my rectangular marquee tool, which is usually the better way to work because after all, pattern tiles are invariably rectangular inside Photoshop. And so I'll just go ahead and select a region that I think is going to repeat pretty well. I might actually want to drag this corner up a little bit like so. And then, just as you've done in the past, you can go up to the Edit menu and choose Define Pattern, which will bring up the Pattern Name dialog box, complete with this preview, which shows me that we're seeing the composite version of all visible layers inside of the composition, which includes not only the selected background layer, and in fact, the selected layer doesn't matter, but we're also seeing parts of the face layer that are contained inside this selected region. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out, and I'll hide all the other layers by pressing the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and clicking on the eye in front of the background. And as I say, it doesn't matter which layer is selected, so I'll just go ahead and click on the face layer so you can see what I mean. And then I'll take advantage of the new way to create patterns inside Photoshop, which is to click on this little plus sign at the bottom of the Patterns panel, which invokes that same Define Pattern command that we saw a moment ago. Notice that we are now seeing the background and only the background here inside that thumbnail. And so I'll go ahead and call this guy Linen 4 because I've created 4 linens in the past, and I'll click OK. Now I notice that I've made a mistake. I've created this new pattern inside the trees group. Now I can drag it and drop it to a different group, but as things stand now, I can't manage to invoke an auto scroll. Notice that it's not scrolling down a list. So I'd have to basically sit here and drag that pattern one group at a time in order to get it down to the group I like. So instead, I'm just going to delete this pattern and recreate it in the right location. That'll give me a chance to show you how to delete things. And so I'll go ahead and select the pattern to make it active. And what I did was I also added the pattern to my layers panel. I don't want that, so I'll press Control Z or Command Z on the Mac to undo that change. And then with that pattern selected, I'll go ahead and not click on the trash icon because that would bring up an alert message. Instead, I will press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click, and that'll just get rid of that pattern. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and scroll down the list here to this group I've made in advance called Canvas, And so, in other words, it's not going to appear inside your version of Photoshop unless you click on a little folder icon in order to make a new group, and you go ahead and name it Canvas, of course. Anyway, I'm going to escape out of that because I've already done it. And then I'll twirl this guy open by clicking on this little twirly triangle right there. Notice that I have 3 linen patterns that I've already created. And so now I'll go ahead and click on that plus sign once again, and I will call this guy Linen 4, and then I'll click OK. All right, now I'll bring back all the other layers by Alt or Option clicking on the eye icon in front of the background like so. I'll deselect the image by pressing Control D or Command D on the Mac. And then just to see how well this pattern works, I'll go ahead and drag it and drop it into the background. At which point I see that it doesn't repeat seamlessly, but it's good enough for our purposes here. And that is my rough introduction to the new Patterns panel here inside Photoshop 2020.